We're talking today with Dennis Falcon of Wyoming, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Dennis, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, January 19th of 1981.
Okay, did you grow up in Milwaukee or did you move around?
I moved around. I had lived in Phoenix for a majority of my life.
Okay, and where did you go? Did you go to high school down there?
No, I went through elementary and then eventually I returned to Muskegon for some family here where I went through high school and graduated.
Okay, so Muskegon, Michigan. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And what was your family doing for a living while you were growing up?
My uncle was a factory worker. That's who I grew up with. And my aunt was a homemaker.
Okay. And then, did you have siblings or cousins that you grew up with? Or
I grew up with my cousins.
Okay. All right. And then, when did you finish high school?
June 9th of 99.
Okay. And what did you decide to do out of high school?
I joined the Navy.
And on what date did you join the Navy?
Well, I graduated June 6th. I was in boot camp on June 9th, 3 days
right.
after graduation.
Okay. Now, why did you pick the Navy?
I picked the Navy because I knew that it was more technological. It wasn't really the ground and pound ideal of warfare. And I knew that there were lots of trades that I could learn throughout the Navy in comparison to other branches.
All right. And did that have a lot to do with your decision to go into the service?
Partially, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I wasn't ready for college, but I knew that I wanted to make money and I wanted to do something different. And I definitely wanted to leave my hometown of Muskegon.
All right. And did you have friends or relatives or people you knew who'd been in the service before? Or were you just doing this on your own?
I had roughly 8 or 9 people from my graduating class, and my older cousin had joined a year previous.
And
kind of convinced
okay.
to join.
And did he go in the Navy or something else?
He was in the Navy. They were all Navy.
Okay, all Navy. So you got a connection there.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, where's the first place they send you then once you start?
I went to Recruit Training Command in Great Lakes, Illinois for boot camp, transitioning from civilian life to being used to being in the military.
All right. Now describe the process. You arrive at Great Lakes, and this is North Chicago, so it's north of the city, kind of up along the lakeshore. You arrive there, what happens to you?
Basically, we had to wait for enough people to make an entire division to begin processing and transitioning to this, acquiring this lifestyle.
Okay. How long did you have to wait for that?
Roughly 11 days.
And so what do you do for those 11 days?
Whatever they tell you.
Okay. But are they finding things to keep you busy? I mean, is it?
Yes, you're always busy.
Now, have they not done things like, cut your hair and put you in uniform yet? Or are you still in civilian clothes so far?
They waited for the entire division to get there. You were getting things like clothes issued to you and uniforms and calling home to make sure 30-second phone call to tell your parents that you made it. That's pretty much it.
Do they otherwise cut you off from communication at that point?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, once you get the division there together, now what do they do with you?
It's a 3-month process to transition. You learn many things like military history and heritage, naval. You go through many classes, and you just get used to the different lifestyle and different things that the military requires.
Okay. How do they handle sort of the discipline part of things? How do they teach you to follow orders?
Well, there were several ways back in my time. They could physically drain it out of you, or it was a mental process also. Sleep deprivation, recognizing rank and recognition with the power of the authority above you. You're pretty much understood that you are at the lowest point below anyone else and that they can control you. If there were people that failed urinalysis or were unable to follow orders, they were immediately sent home with a dishonorable discharge, unable to serve the country.
Okay. So at this stage, they're perfectly willing to weed out people they don't want.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, how much did you know about the process before you started it?
Well, prior to that, I was in what's called a delayed entry program, which was awaiting to graduate and go to boot camp. During this time, you were required to study and know several things about the military before you got in. I, however, was in school and working at McDonald's, so I didn't really study, and I didn't know everything, well, pretty much anything at all, hearsay, and I learned it real quick.
Okay.
And if I didn't learn it, there were several push-ups to make up for that.
Right. Now, had your cousin who'd gone in the year earlier told you anything about the boot camp?
He would always make jokes, pretty much saying, "I'm ready for you. It's going to be a rough ride for you."
Okay. Now, in boot camp, how much physical training do you get?
It wasn't what I really thought it was. There was a lot more of mental, lots of classes. You had to learn, for service week, you had to go, and several people worked for the cafeteria, the galley, what we call, and cleaning dishes and setting tables, and several hours. At that point, it's extreme fatigueness and sleep deprivation.
All right. Now, do they organize your division into sort of subgroups and into smaller units, or are you with what group or specific? Is there a particular group of guys that you're training with? I mean,
you train with the same guys. You all live together and do everything together. And they classify their buildings as naval ships.
Okay.
And they assign you to each one.
all right.
My division was not integrated. It was an all-male division. But that's pretty much it.
And how many men in your ship, if you will, in the same barracks?
Roughly 60.
Okay. And so is that kind of the core group of people that you got to know where you work with?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How easy or hard was it for you to adjust to military life?
It was hard at first because I wasn't really sure what I was looking forward to. But as time was progressing, I was starting to understand what they were requiring and what was acceptable due to the military standards.
Okay. Do you view the drill instructors or as being basically, fair in what they did, or did they treat everybody the same? Or
Yes, they treated us all terribly.
Right. Okay. But you kind of figured out the logic of what they were doing at some point, or just how to
Yes.
survive it?
Eventually I understood their logic, what they were doing. They were breaking us down and everything we knew, all the bad habits, because a majority of us were young, not really mature enough or ready for what we had signed up for.
Okay.
So they did make a man out of us.
Okay. And what kind of backgrounds do these guys have?
Several different places from around the entire country. There were people from Alaska. There were people from Texas that never witnessed snow. It was very extreme diverse. There was lots of people from the Southwest that spoke different languages. There was Philippines, and it was just extremely culturally diverse in America's cultural.
And were these mostly 18, 19-year-olds, or did you have some older guys?
The age limit was 35 at the time to join. Majority of us were younger. There was a lot of men in their 20s.
So you had some guys maybe who'd been to, were there some who had been to college? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And do you have a sense of why they were there? Were they kind of mostly like you, or?
Lots of them just didn't know what they wanted to do. Some of them had racked up some college debt. We're not really sure what they were going to school for. And decided that they wanted to try something else. There were some that followed tradition of their family. Their fathers had served, or their grandfather or uncle. But a lot of national pride.
Okay. So once you get through that first 3 months, then what happens to you?
Then everyone's got pretty much a different technical school that they go to. There are people that are in aviation. There are welders. There are diesel mechanics like myself. There are people that just do paperwork for the Navy. Everyone goes to their own technical school.
Okay, and how is that sorted out? Do you request that when you sign up, or
Yes, you get a contract when you initially go to the military entrance processing station in the capital of whatever state it is that you are. Ours was Lansing.
Okay, and are there so you can pick what you're training now, but are there qualifications to that? Can they change that or do something different with you?
Well, we took the ASVAB test. Everyone's required to take it. And then from the ASVAB test, you see your score, and then you see the demands of the Navy. Then they give you options. They will give you selections. Then you can pick. And due to the time that you pick, you can pick by either your job or the date that you want to be shipped out by.
Mm-hmm. But do they have a provision to just change that if they need you to do something else?
If you were selected, many nuclear engineers could not pass the long nuclear engineering school. So if they were to fail out, the Navy would send them in as undesignated, which is very horrible. Many painting of the ship.
Yep. Just ordinary seaman at that point.
Yes.
All right. Okay. But basically, the point when you're going in, as long as you qualify for what you've signed up for, the expectation is you get to go on and do that.
Yes.
Okay. And you took diesel mechanics as sort of your area?
Yes.
Okay. Now, where do you train for that?
Great Lakes. It was actually right across the street from the boot camp.
Okay. And then how long a program is that?
That I was gone roughly 6 months total with the boot camp and the technical school,
Okay.
so that was another 3 months.
All right. Now, over the course of boot camp and then when you switch over into your specialized training, do they give you more either freedom or responsibility as you go? I mean, because initially you go in there, you get your 30-second phone call, and you just belong to them.
Yes. As you're closer to graduation of your initial doctrination boot camp, you start to get more free time. You get to call your family a little more. You get Sundays off during boot camp, but after when you're in your technical school, you can talk on the phone whenever you want. But you still have to follow the guidelines of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and obedience of your superiors.
All right. Now, describe a little bit the actual training program that you were in.
I went to Diesel Engineman A School in Great Lakes. We learned how to tear down and reassemble diesel engines. We learned also several other things like the anchor windlass, it's called. It's the pumps, the hydraulic pumps that raise and lower the extremely heavy multi-ton anchors. Also hydraulic systems that could steer the ship and control the pitch of the ship. What I mean by that is the degree of angle for the propellers that allows the ship to move forward and backwards without changing the rotations of the shaft.
Okay. All right. And are you actually on any ships at this point, or are you doing this all on land?
It's all on land. It's on building. But we're still around the Great Lakes, so we were still required to do some swimming in the Great Lakes and some in the pool.
Swimming in Lake Michigan?
In January.
Yeah, okay. But now, did they have any training ships or anything like that actually at the base on the lake, or
not really.
Okay.
Nothing that we really used as a facility. They had everything that was set up in buildings.
All right. And then, so when then do you finish this?
I finished mine December 7th of 99. And they gave me 2 weeks off before I had orders to go to my first Navy ship.
All right. And what's your first Navy ship?
The USS Ashland. It's an LSD class amphibious assault ship.
Okay. And can you explain a little bit for people what exactly, describe the ship a little bit?
Okay. The main mission of the ship, it's under an armed ARG group. It's called Arms Ready Group. Its main purpose is to haul the Marines to the land and all their equipment, tanks, Humvees, assault rifles, Marines themselves. There were actually more Marines than U.S. sailors whenever we were prepared for any attack.
Right. And did they have amphibious landing vehicles? Was that standard cargo?
They had many tanks and Humvees that were brought to shore by the landing aircraft LCACs, landing craft air cushioning, which is a gas turbine powered vessel that brings them to the land from the water. These can also go on the land and water themselves.
All right. Now, would you carry those in your ship, or how would they get those?
They would be on our ship.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And so, would you have kind of a standard load for what you would carry if you were, say, cruising the Pacific or something, or did it just depend on the individual mission?
It depended on the orientation of the mission.
Okay. All right. So where was your ship when you first joined it?
It was in Little Creek, Virginia, based outside of Norfolk.
All right. And then once you get out there, I mean, do you stay in port for a while, or do you go out to sea right away, or what happens?
I went there. It was December 21st. I was expected to be on there. It was Christmas time. We stayed on the ship in port most of the time, and there are always ships out and ships that are relieving other ships.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get to go out for about 6 months.
Okay. So how do you spend your first 6 months then?
Learning my work center, learning my space, learning the engines, the people I work with, getting associated with them, and my superiors.
Okay. What kind of reception do you get when you join that group?
Could you elaborate? Reception?
Well, are you just does anybody make a point of showing you what to do, or do they ignore you, or?
Yeah, they pretty much tell you what to do, and that's pretty much what they don't want to do.
All right. Well, what were some of the early duties that you did a lot of?
A lot of cleaning the diesels up and cleaning the workspace up, and make sure that if needed, the ship could go out to sea. It was combat ready at all times.
Mm-hmm. And did you do any kind of sort of small exercises just in the Bay Area and stuff? Did you actually get out of port at all, or?
We did sometimes. We were out for a couple days here or there. Our first trip was out to Baltimore. That was our first actual time being out at sea. There were a lot of new people, not only just engine men, but there were new people throughout the ship. There were new deck seamen, and there were new radar technicians, several other quartermasters that steered the ship, and everyone just kind of learned the basics of how their job was.
All right. And then when you're off duty, then how you just stay on the ship, or you get to go ashore? What do you do?
You get to go ashore. There are restrictions. When you're in the United States itself, there are not really many restrictions. They pretty much let you do what you want to do. You can go and rent a car or stay in a hotel if you don't have duty that day or work the next day. Your options are pretty open when you're inside the United States.
All right. How did the locals in the community treat the sailors?
They were proud. They were extremely happy to have us around. Of course, there are always some that don't believe and don't follow the ideology of warfare.
But on the whole, well, because I guess in Norfolk in particular, the larger city, I mean, at certain periods in history, often there were signs saying, sailors keep off the grass or any number of other things like that. Sometimes in a place where there's a lot of activity, the townies don't necessarily like them. But you were Little Creek, though, was a little bit outside of that, right? So your immediate community.
Yeah, Little Creek was roughly only a few miles away from Norfolk. There are several bases around that area.
Mm-hmm.
There, including Dam Neck Naval Intelligence Base. There was a naval air base that's out there. There's Little Creek amphibious base, and of course there's Norfolk, which is the largest Navy base that we have in the United States.
Right.
And with large groups of people, there's always going to be that kind of group that doesn't always want to obey the rules and displace. Aircraft carriers themselves are roughly the population of small cities, and if you consider an entire small city, of course you're going to see people that are messing up all the time.
Right. Yeah, I was just kind of asking about the attitudes of the locals, because they'll be used to that on one level, and the question is how do they handle it. So in some areas, it can be a good situation, other areas not so much. Just kind of asking, but by your impression on the whole, you got along with them, and
yeah, I got along with them pretty much just fine. I mean, I was still, just because I had transitioned to military life did not grow me up. I was still the same young immature boy that was scared and ready to join the military because he wasn't ready for college.
Okay.
So I had good experiences and bad, but there are millions of sailors that have been through that place that have had worse and have had better experiences through that area.
All right. Now, over the course of 6 months there, are you kind of getting more interesting stuff to do, and are you still kind of bottom of the totem pole for that?
I was still kind of bottom of the totem pole. We didn't receive any new people for a while. I had no car because I had no credit and I had no money. My job at McDonald's didn't pay enough getting out. And so I had to pretty much walk everywhere, but the MWR, which is the recreational group that supports the military, they also provide things on base to do. But it's kind of boring, per se, because it's all military people and everything's military all the time.
All right. So on some level, is it a relief to go to sea? Or is it a good change?
Yeah, because some of the men that have been there before me, and there are several men that have done prior enlistments before, had cars set up. A lot of married men were going home to their wives after the general work day, and I was still on the ship with no car, and nothing to do. It's a form of insanity. But when we got to go out to sea, you kind of bonded with the people. You got to know them a little more when you see them every day.
All right. So when do you leave port for the first time then? Just to really go somewhere?
Besides the Baltimore, around February or March time frame, I went to the U.S. Virgin Islands, U.S. British Virgin Islands.
Okay.
St. John, St. Thomas, St. Croix.
All right. And was that just a short cruise or?
Yeah, we were only out to sea for roughly a week.
Okay.
And we got to see the Caribbean, which was very, very beautiful. The water was very clear. The locals were amazing. There are some of the wealthiest people on those islands, and it's a lifetime experience.
All right. And what were you just kind of making a tour and visiting places, or were you doing any exercises?
While we were out to sea for that short period of time, there were exercises. There was training.
Okay. But are you actually training for amphibious landing, or just?
We were training for everything. We were training for firefighting that was on the ship, engineering casualties if the engines broke. There were lots of things. We were training for terrorist attacks.
Okay. Did you have Marines on the ship with you when you were out, or just the Navy crew?
Just the Navy crew. When the Marines came on, sometimes only few came on. It wasn't always full of Marines.
All right, but this time it's really just for the crew. Was it on some level kind of a shakedown for a lot of the new guys?
Yeah, it was just kind of like, oh, hello, how you doing? This is the Navy.
All right, so you go through that. Now, before you'd actually kind of gone out there, I mean, had you ever spent much time on boats or on the water before?
No, and I knew nothing about engines either. I couldn't change a spark plug on my gasoline engine in my car.
All right. When guys go out for the first time, do they have seasickness problems?
There were several that we caught along. I never had the issue, but some of the guys, especially that were up higher on the ship and experienced more of the waves, really had some hard times.
Okay, because your normal duty station, if that's the engines, that's going to be down below, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. And toward the center of the ship or the stern, or?
I mean, if it rocks, it rocks. You're going to experience it no matter what. Some people just aren't cut out for it.
Yeah. I mean, were there some who'd have enough trouble with seasickness they just have to leave entirely, or was it not that bad that you saw?
Well, I've seen some that were really bad. I've seen some guys that were just green. I've seen some guys carrying trash bags at all times in case of vomiting issues. However, they do have a seasickness pill, which is required to take 24 hours prior to going out to sea. If you do not take it on the right time and you have seasickness problems, you will get sick. I never experienced that. I never got sick.
Okay. All right. So that's just a short cruise, and you come back, and then you're back in it for a couple more months before you go anywhere else?
Yeah, it was kind of back and forth. We were in, and then this was all preparation for the large cruise. We made small trips to Puerto Rico and stuff here and there, but it was all preparation to going to Europe and the Mediterranean.
Okay. And when did you do that?
I did that in early 2000.
Okay. Just describe the trip over.
Well, the transition took about 2 weeks. Since I was on a diesel platform ship, it was made for torque, not speed. We had some Marines on there. It wasn't completely full. Everyone got to know each other, obviously. Personally, I was on restriction. I got in a little bit of trouble. So I was extremely busy the entire time that we were gone before we actually got into Europe.
All right. And what port do you go to first?
We went to Palma, Spain.
Okay. So that's fun. It's like on the island of Majorca. That's out.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And now when you go to these places, is it normal to give the crew shore leave, or only some of them, or?
We had what's called duty section. We were in what's called 3-section duty stations. 1/3 of the ship had to stay on at all times. So if you did not have duty, you had to work your regular Navy hours, whatever they be. They're all different depending on the job that you did. Then once you were complete, you were free to go and do whatever you would like to do.
All right. And were you not allowed off the boat because you were on restriction, or were they?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't get to go out and practice your Spanish there?
No, I was not able to do that.
All right.
Not for the first time. The
okay.
second day I was.
All right. So now do you stay in Port long, or do you just move around a lot?
They were short trips. Sometimes it'd be 4 or 5 days. Sometimes it'd be a week. Sometimes it'd be 3 days.
Okay. Now, are you traveling with a larger naval force, or are you by yourself? Or?
We met with a lot of them that were out to sea, but we didn't really hit the ports with them per se. Some of the other vessels went to France. Some went actually in the middle of the Mediterranean. Some went to the northern Horn of Africa. The U.S. military presence was available throughout the entire time.
Right. Okay. And were you doing any landing exercises, or just sailing around?
We did some exercises. We took some helicopters on. Did a lot of just different various exercises throughout. We tested out some of our missiles and some of our guns, and we had gun qualifications and different certifications just that the Navy requires.
All right. And did you work at all with any NATO allies, or were you just on your own?
We were just on our own.
All right. Now how long is this cruise? How long do you stay out there?
We were out for a little over 6 months.
Okay, that's a good long time. And what ports did you actually get to go ashore in?
Well, I only missed a day in the first one. Overall, I went to 3 ports in Spain. I went to Palma, Almeria, and Rota. Then we went over to Livorno and Trieste in Italy. Then we went over to Rijeka and Split, Croatia. Then we went to Greece. Then we went to the island of Crete, to Suda Bay, and several other places.
Okay. And do they give you much of a chance to get off and do any tourism, or is it?
Yeah, actually, the MWR, which I had mentioned before, had many tours set up. I got to see the Leaning Tower. I got to go see the Colosseum. I believe it was free. I want to say most of them. Then some of the vendors came on for the currency exchanges, so you didn't have American dollars when you went out if you just wanted to go. Generally, I like to go step out and just try something the first day. Something, when in Rome.
Yeah.
So I went and ate just whichever local food, tried whatever local draft beers were brewed.
Okay. And as the sailors stop in these different places, were there some places that were sort of more hospitable than others, or?
Yes, there were lots of them that were. It was different. According to the Geneva Conventions and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you were to abide by all rules and regulations of that country while you were there.
Right.
If the drinking age was not 21, if the drinking age was 18 and you were under 21, you were permitted to drink.
Right.
Or any other situations that may occur. Some countries would not allow you to spit on the sidewalk. You would get in lots of trouble for that. But you were always to abide by their rules when you're in their country.
And were there, part of it, I'm asking a little bit, are there places where the people themselves are going to seem to be relatively friendly or hospitable, or places where they don't like Americans, or can you tell?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was lots of places that welcomed us. In Spain, I spoke a lot of Spanish, so many of them welcomed me there. In Italy, we have Navy base that was over there, so they were more accustomed to the United States being over there. However, Croatia had war about 10 years previously, so that was a little bit different. They weren't really too fond. Many of them weren't too fond of us being there. Some of them didn't like the beliefs of the Americans. Some of us just didn't like our presence in general.
Yeah, because you had the former Yugoslavia that had broken up into pieces, and they all
Yes.
fought each other, and the Americans tried to sort things out a couple of times in that process. Yeah. Okay. What about in Greece?
Greece was a very wonderful place. The beaches were beautiful. Everyone was welcoming. It was very wonderful to see the historical value of Greece. all the way from King Philip of Macedonia, different remains, and ancient Greece museums were all over. And these tours were available to us. Some of them costed some money, some of them didn't. But it wasn't as new as the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a lot more developed.
Okay. And were you old enough to appreciate what you were seeing?
At first I wasn't, but then once I stepped foot in my first museum, I really got interested in seeing the artifacts, the conservation, because the Greeks really conserve their artifacts, and they take pride in their history.
Yeah. All right. So at this stage, would you say the Navy is kind of meeting your expectations, or going past them? Or?
I was still a little bit immature. I was taking it all in. I wasn't sure. It was a very different situation for a young man from Muskegon to come into and just go on the other side of the world. The expectations were good. Everything was being met, and it felt like they were very concerned about the sailors and what they were doing, and to try to make sure that everyone had a good time.
All right. Now, how much communication do you have with people back home while you're out at sea?
Not much. My first ship, the technologies of constant email and internet weren't always available especially to the younger junior enlisted. The officers and a lot of the top secret gentlemen were able to surf the internet at any point in time and have satellite phones at all times. But there were times when they did have the phones on, and you could buy calling cards and call home. I didn't.
All right. Now, over the course of the cruise, now we're kind of getting, latter part of the year 2000 and so forth. We haven't had, we're still, a year away from 9/11, but there was the terrorist attack on the USS Cole that took place late in 2000. Were you in the Mediterranean at that time? Or?
We were out in the Atlantic. We were towards the Mediterranean. I'm not exactly sure where. We experienced something a day or two prior where we woke up in the middle of the night. There was a small vessel that was approaching the ship, and it wasn't responding. So we followed the proper rules of engagement and got to mend our battle stations, and were prepared for anything. Now, the USS Cole, which is an Arleigh class destroyer, had driven this small boat off of our radars, and we didn't hear or see anything of them since. Then, on October 12th, tragedy struck. Of course, many Americans don't even know, but on my second ship, I was able to serve with a man that was actually a survivor on the USS Cole. And he explained that a small ship came with Muslims, and as it approached, 3 of them stood on the front deck and saluted the ship as they hit, wired with many explosives, blowing a hole inside of the ship. But all the training that the Navy had taught was very uniform, so everyone was ready and prepared. And due to this fact, they were able to maintain watertight integrity and keep the ship afloat long enough to get a submarine tender underneath it to get it up and get it to port. And they made all the repairs, and the USS Cole is actually now back in commission. And that will not happen to us again.
All right. And that was off the coast of Yemen where they got hit, or was it actually in the harbor when they got hit? Or
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Because it didn't sink, and it blew a very, very large hole in the side of that ship,
Yes,
too.
an extremely large hole, and we lost 17 sailors.
All right. Now, when do you get back home from that first cruise, for that first long cruise?
Yeah, I want to say it was around December also.
Okay. Now, at this stage, have you been in long enough to get some leave time, or you get to go home after you get back, or?
I had earned some leave time. You earn over every month. You earn a certain amount of time, just so everyone can get it. And because it was the holidays, they like to cycle people through and let them go home. People were allowed first leave, which is they were home during Christmas time, and people were allowed second leave, which tried to work it into where you were around home New Year's time.
All right. So did you go home for a while after you got back?
I went home for 2 weeks.
Okay. Now, what was it like to go back to Muskegon?
I actually stayed with my mother out in Grand Rapids.
Okay. So what was it like to kind of come back after, year or
It
so in
was
the Navy?
it was different. I came back to Grand Rapids, but I visited my friends in Muskegon, and it it was a different thing. It was something that I felt that they would never understand,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely at this point, that's when I started to realize that I was maturing more. The attack on the USS Cole definitely made me understand a lot more what the Navy's purpose was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so basically, your friends are maybe not really all that different from what they were when you left.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Many of them were playing video games in their parents' basement still.
All right. So then you go back out. Now, do you stay in port for a while, or you get another cruise pretty soon, or what happens?
Well, we put a lot of hours on our diesels.
Mhm.
Bearings wear and piston sleeves wear and several other parts on the ship were required to be replaced.
Mhm.
So we went to the shipyard where we were actually out of the ship or out of the water,
Mhm.
and we were on the ship, and it was going under extreme overhaul. It's kind of like taking your car, drag racing, and then rebuilding the engine.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, then they cut out several parts of the ship, and lots of the pistons on these diesels some of them were, well, they were all roughly as big as a VW, and they had to be craned out. So it was a lot of work. It was nice to see the disassembly and understand how things really worked.
Now, in your capacity, are you doing a lot of the work yourself, or just have you observed it to see what's going on? Or?
We observed. We had a lot of technicians and outside DoD civilian contractors coming on board to diagnose the issues,
Mm-hmm.
take measurements on the bearings and everything else. Just check water leaks and shaft seals and everything else.
Do you have an idea how old the ship was, or when keel was laid, or?
I want to say it was late in 1989, but I'm not really
Okay.
sure.
So it's not a really old ship. I mean,
No.
LSD is an older design, but it's not. But yours was a recent vintage, relatively speaking.
Yeah, the actual beginning of the LSD class ship dates back to World War II. And the actually LSD-1 was the USS Ashland. Now LSD-48 was a reconstruction of new modern technology.
So you've learned your naval history.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then about how long then do you stay in port before you go out again?
Depends on how long the overhaul took. It took a little while. But actually it got sped up due to the September 11th attacks.
Okay. So then were you then in Virginia when?
Yes, we were in Portsmouth, Virginia shipyards when the September 11th attack hit.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit just for how you heard about it and then what happens on the base and stuff once the word comes down.
Well, we weren't on a base. We were in a shipyard, so
Mhm.
it was more of a private kind of thing because a lot of them were civilian contractors. September 11th happened, and I was actually down in the engine room. And I went up, and it was time for me to get something to eat before I went right back down there real quick. And I saw the attacks and the planes hit on CNN, but I thought that they were watching a movie, so I was like, what movie are you guys watching? And there were several people crying, and people were calling home to New York. So then I learned that it was real. Along with other things throughout the Navy, throughout time that were happening in the United States. For instance, when floods were happening in New Orleans, several peoples were experiencing that.
Mhm.
But laying back on the September 11th attacks, that was a breach of national security. The reconstruction of the ship was at an expeditious rate at that point to make us warfare ready. For combat, to get the Marines onto the beach.
Okay. A lot of military bases after 9/11 were on some form of lockdown or something like that. You're in the shipyard. Do they change the rules that you're operating by other than just speeding you up? Or?
Yep. They pretty much made us stay on the ship. We were on lockdown and we were getting prepared. It was extremely tough. But at that point I was definitely a lot more mature and I had more understanding of what the military was and the freedom of religion. and all the freedoms that the United States believes in, democracy and justice for the people, and the right to defend that, which we obtained. So I was ready, although the night before I met a beautiful girl and we were supposed to go out on a date that night, so I guess that didn't really work out for me.
Oh, all right. Do you think it was in some ways helpful to you or useful that, a lot of people when 9/11 happened, they didn't really know what to do or how to react, and you had a job to do?
Yes. I definitely, that young boy from Muskegon started to work constantly, work to just get everything ready to respond for the several lives that were lost over the September 11th events.
All right. Now, how long did you sort of stay on lockdown status? When did things...
There were lots of guys that were married, and people were allowed to leave the ship. But since I was single, I stayed on there, and I worked to get everything in preparation. On top of working alongside the reconstruction, I was able to learn how the ship was configured and properly actually operated. Though I'd been out to sea for 6 months on it, I didn't really understand several concepts that were on there. But I got to learn steam processes, the importance of everything else, how to make salt water into fresh water, which is a long but important process.
Now, was there an actual sort of training program in place, or were you just picking that up because you were there and wanted something to do?
I was picking it up because I was there and I wanted to learn. Because when we were going to respond to that, if something broke, we were not always able to fly contractors on to repair them. We were able to do many of the repairs ourselves.
All right. And how long was it before you actually then go out to sea after that?
It was roughly a month or two.
Okay.
6 to 8 weeks.
And then will they send you to the Middle East, or you go somewhere else?
We went straight to the Middle East. We went back through the Mediterranean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, which is very beautiful if you've never seen it. Then we passed through the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, circled the Arabic Peninsula.
Okay, when you went through the Suez Canal, were you on duty down below, or were you up on deck?
I actually went up on deck. We had the we had alternated turns because it's a once in a lifetime event to pass through the Suez Canal. So we altered. We took turns going out there and just seeing what it was like. And it's very interesting. The bridges swing through and they connect so that you can cross Egypt right there. And they're manned. But as we passed through Egypt, there were several other guards on all the bridges, and they were very happy to see all the naval vessels responding to these attacks, because not everyone believed in the Al-Qaeda's beliefs.
Yeah, and indeed, certainly the Egyptian military was not exactly a hotbed for Islamists or whatever anyway. I think Egypt may have felt threatened too, and it's sort of one moment when even a lot of Muslim states thought that was bad. So at that point, you're not there, and you're not really kind of worried about what the Egyptians might be doing. You have a sense of sort of whose side they're on at that point anyway.
Yeah, at that point, you could go through, and some of them you could tell were watching old American movies, because we were going through and saw a couple of them on the side, and they started doing the old WWF bushwhacker moves. It was actually kind of funny.
All right. So you go through the canal. Now, do you go around into the Persian Gulf itself then?
Yes.
Okay.
We went around. The water temperature was a lot different than that of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean due to the flow, the currents that flow throughout. They come up from the Caribbean and also from the Pacific into the Persian is much different. Therefore, our equipment actually ran a little bit differently. But it was the training of the reconstruction helped everyone understand how to make adjustments and get things to operational level.
All right. So water temperature will affect how the engines run and
yes,
and so forth. All right. Now, once you go into the Gulf, do you go into port or stay at sea, or what happens?
Well, we dropped the Marines off, and then we had some people volunteer to test fuel out on there to make sure that we weren't getting bad fuel to fill the tanks on the Humvees, the diesel fuel. But not many Navy people, just a few, and they weren't there that long. Oh,
Had you taken a full load of Marines this time? Or?
yes.
Okay.
We were ready to go.
So, how many would they carry at once? Do you have any idea?
I want to say roughly 900.
Okay. So how crowded was the ship?
Extremely crowded.
And are there discipline issues with getting along with that many Marines at once, or?
Yeah, there was a lot, because when you're out to sea, there's not much that you can really do due to no internet access really at the time. You can't take college online classes, and the extreme work hours. You really don't have much to do but work and sleep and do your laundry and work out. And so, with that being said, other than work and sleep, you have laundry and working out. So there were lots of issues with the laundry and the working out between the Navy and the Marines. A lot of the Marines, all they really did was polish their guns, polish their boots, and work out. And some of them helped with the food, with helping with the dishes or food preparation, because they also have their cooks. And with whatever's possible. You know, they trained a lot of our gunners' mates on certain high-tech weapons, and it's some of the most amazing firepower that you'll ever come across, and you will never see it again. This is also a once-in-a-lifetime event. But yeah, there was lots of issues with the workout room, and once we got the SEALs on board, then we definitely got things in a little more order with the Marines.
Okay, so the SEALs can sort of out-Marine the Marines?
The SEALs are the elite of the elite.
Yeah. Okay. And did you drop off the Marines in Kuwait or someplace else?
Oh, we dropped them off actually right outside of Iraq.
Okay.
Right outside the coast there. And then we went to Bahrain.
Okay. Because at that point when you got there, we're not at war with Iraq at that stage.
No.
So that's probably Kuwait, which is right next to Iraq, is most likely.
Yeah. There was and Kuwait was definitely a lot more American friendly than Iraq was at the time. So we were out in that area and we dropped them off.
Okay. And then you go to Bahrain, and do they basically keep you on the ship now, or?
Oh, we were able to go on the base, but it's actually about as fun as the ship is. There's not much to do but work out, do your job, do your laundry. You can go to the base thing and have a little bit of fun.
But the base is segregated from the rest of
extremely.
Community. Yeah.
Yes, at this point I had re-enlisted because I wasn't sure that I wanted to make the military career. However, I did not have any money or anything preparation for getting out. So I researched all the bases, and I found that Bahrain was the highest paying one, but the second highest paying one was out in Japan. So I decided to re-enlist and save up some money and go to Japan. So when we went to Bahrain, the ship left, but I stayed there.
Okay, so when was that?
That was in
2002, or
March 2001, 2002. Yeah,
2002, yeah, because 9/11 is 2001.
Yeah, it's 2002.
Okay.
Yeah, and then from there I flew commercially to Virginia, where I had a rental car ready, and I came home for 1 month, and then I was on my way out to the other side of the planet.
Now, while you were still in the Gulf, I mean, presumably you're in port sometimes, but were you out patrolling in the Gulf, or you just sit there in Bahrain, or what happened?
We sat there. We patrolled. Once the ship had left, there was actually no room for us on base, so I stayed at the El Salfir Hotel, which the Middle East follows under extreme elitism, so it was extremely expensive. I want to say it was roughly $120 American per night to stay in one of these rooms.
Which may not be so different from a Holiday Inn Express in Ohio somewhere, but
no.
but for Bahrain probably.
Yeah, it was definitely not the quality of the Holiday Inn Express for that price. Holiday Inn Express there would be extremely much more expensive. I used to think that it was just funny watching McDonald's commercials with, you got the American-made car and you've got the Muslim coming through with her face veiled up ordering something. It's kind of like Americanized, but not really. But it was the earliest effects of globalization that I could really recall was McDonaldization throughout every country I went through.
All right. So So did you actually spend much time in the Gulf, or was it just deliver the Marines, go to Bahrain, get off the boat, and...
Yeah, I was actually out there, out to sea for roughly 6 to 8 months altogether with everything, waiting to transfer. And then I came home for 1 month.
Right.
And they really took care of me when I came home. I had reserved a mid-size rental car, and all they had for me was a Mitsubishi Eclipse Spider convertible, which I really got to enjoy. And they knew I was coming home, so they actually kind of set that up, I believe. They told me that was the only car they had left, but I think that they were actually really happy to.
All right. Now, when you re-enlisted, you apply for a new training or anything different from what you've been doing?
Yes, we contact bupers, which is there are certain billets. Like at this time, I was an E4, so I looked across the globe to see what the Navy had offered for my rate as an E4, as an engineman third class, and I just applied for them. And if the captain or whoever it got approved, then you would re-enlist for the amount of time to fill that billet for. So I re-enlisted for Japan for 3.5 years. And then after I'd been home on leave for a month, which was a lot more different to hang out with my friends than the first time, I was out in Japan. And completely different. Completely different from the Mediterranean, completely different from the Caribbean, the Middle East, completely different. Matter of fact, I was on a completely different class ship. I was on a cruiser with guided missiles. Now, I had mentioned before that the LSD was part of the R group and mainly amphibious assaults. However, the cruiser with guided missile is more of a technological warfare. There's so much technology, such as Tomahawks and several other things, that the main purpose of this cruiser with guided missiles is to protect the aircraft carrier that was in the area. And we were assigned to the Pacific 7th Fleet, which the aircraft carrier was USS Kitty Hawk.
Okay. And what was the name of your cruiser?
USS Chancellorsville,
All right.
CG-62.
Okay. Now, where were you based in Japan?
Yokosuka. It was in the Tokyo Bay Area.
Okay, yeah. Major Japanese naval base.
Yes.
There. Okay. Now, do you fly out there individually, or have you gone out on a ship, or?
There were people from other ships that were flying out there that particular bay. People were coming and going on a regular basis. So I was out there, and there was a sponsor for me from my ship that was waiting to. Well, it was actually from my base because I had arrived on a Friday, and it was kind of the Navy was more geared for the weekend. So it was someone that had duty that was stationed on the base to come pick up the new arrivals and take us to the base and show us where our ship was for us to report.
All right. Now, is it different coming out and joining a crew like this when you've had several years in the Navy already and have some rank, or?
Yeah, it was different. I went there. Lots of the people that were there. They were younger and a little more inexperienced, like the young boy from Muskegon that was on the LSD, and with a little bit more rank. There was some people that had already done 4, just like me, and there was actually one gentleman that had done 4 on the same class of ship as me, but his ship was stationed out in Sasebo, which is in southern Japan. And so it was a little competition for rank there to make E5, but and we didn't like each other at first, but by the time we separated, it was a bond that was amazing.
All right. Now, what kind of duties and assignments do you have now?
Okay, because this platform is completely different from my first ship, because it's the design of the ship to fit the duties and responsibilities. My first ship was a diesel powered, so it wasn't really fast. But my second ship was gas turbine powered, so it was much faster. And because it was gas turbine powered, my assignment was no longer to be responsible for the main drive on the ship. My responsibility was for the auxiliaries, everything besides that, the transformation from saltwater to freshwater, the anchor windlass, which I'd mentioned before, the raising and lowering of the anchor, the steering gears, fuel purification, And there were several other things that we still worked. I was still an engineer, but my duties were a lot more easier. And I kept the mentality of my first ship, and that made me excel above and beyond most people in the engineering department.
Now, did it help you that you had sort of put that time into learning the ins and outs of the Ashland when you were on it? There, you were kind of studying all the different things of how it worked. And
Yes, because it gave me a basic concept of what to look forward to and how things worked from an engineering perspective. And I got to learn other things because I'd worked on those big diesels. I worked on the 9-meter small diesel. They had inline 6-cylinder Cummings that were small boats. They're called rigid hull inflatable boats, the rib boats, for man overboard and other purposes like, VBSS teams. And I also took a different course to land helicopters under the RAST, Recovery Arrest Securing and Traverse System, which secured helicopters to the ship and helped them guide into landing during high seas.
all right, what kind of things did they do to train you, prepare you for that?
I went to San Diego for about 6 months, and I went to a hydraulics school. And I learned basic hydraulics, and then I learned a little bit advanced, and then I learned extremely advanced hydraulics. Then I learned how the hydraulic system worked, and how to land helicopters, and how to bring them down and guide them in.
So at what point in the sequence do you go to San Diego?
Oh, well, they needed a RAS technician because it was under the designation of an engineman, so an engineman was required. And we only had one that was on there before, and he was an E7. And he wanted help, so they volunteered me to go down there and check that out. So I said, you know what, I'll get off the ship for 6 months. I've done a lot of sea time. I'll go ahead and go to shore for 6 months and see what this is all about.
Yeah, having to be in San Diego for 6 months just sounds so unpleasant.
Yes, I also have family down there. That was kind of like the Navy paying me to go visit them.
Right. All right. So fairly early on in your assignment, you go when you get this training, and then you're coming back. And does this become kind of a principal function for you on the ship when you come back, or is it just a sideline that you use when necessary?
It was actually a different work center, but I was pretty much the work center supervisor for both work centers. The one that I had originally worked for and this on the side. It was me and 2 chiefs, an electrician's mate that did all the electrical work, and another engineman. E7, E&C chiefs. So, needless to say, I did a majority of the work.
All right. And, how, I don't know, on a ship like that, how common is it to have helicopters coming and going and stuff for you
On
to
a
do?
regular basis. We were getting parts to repair ships at all times. We were getting mail. There were also pilots that needed certifications and qualifications to practice landing on these ships, and that's where we came in.
All right. And did stuff ever go wrong? I mean, problems with landings or crashes or places where you had to...
There were crashes, not really on my ship, but you could see other RAS techs on different ships just losing helicopters into the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean and just not doing their job properly. Of course, there's always mistakes. Not everything always goes as planned. So yeah, it was very good. I was able to successfully land 800 helicopters during my career. 800 successfully. I won't mention unsuccessfully, but.
Yeah, but you got a couple of awards at certain points for doing this kind of work, right?
Yes, sir. I got Navy Achievement Medals. I had 4 of them, and I was recognized as Junior Sailor of the Quarter for the 3 months of 2004 cycle. And then eventually, when they had selected the 4 for the Junior Sailor of the Quarter, they competed for the Junior Sailor of the Year, in which I won that one.
Okay. Now, when the Chancellorsville goes out to sea, where did you go?
We were actually forward deployed, so we were constantly out. I got to see many, many beautiful places, such as Singapore, which is actually, they call it, Singapore is a fine country, because you will be fined if you chew gum and spit it. You will be fined if you spit on the ground. They will actually cane you, but it's actually they're a very peaceful country. They don't want any issues between countries. So we were actually, there were several different navies from several different countries. I was able to go hang out with the Australian Navy, and there was Navy soccer. I was a captain of the soccer team. Had a good time there playing just different countries in soccer, and I used to think I was good until we played some of these other countries where they just grew up with barefoot in a soccer ball and they kind of ran circles around us. But, I gave it the best shot.
All right. Aside from Singapore, where else do you go?
Hong Kong, which is beautiful. British and Chinese intermingling. There's constants back and forth on who controlled that island, as history shows. We were able to go to Darwin, Australia, and the Northern Australian part. We went throughout Japan. I was able to witness Hiroshima and Nagasaki both. And then we got to go to Thailand. We got to go to South Korea and Busan. Malaysia, Brunei. There were several different countries.
All right. Well, this tape is about up, so we're. All right, we were talking about your service on the Chancellorsville, and you kind of talked about some of the different kinds of places that you wound up going. Now, did you ever have any kind of sort of crisis response situation, either in terms of rescue stuff or having to do something in response to something that was going on in one of the conflicts over in the Middle East, or?
Not really as much the Middle East, but we had issues with Taiwan wanting independence. That we definitely intermingled with that. And when we were in Malaysia and Brunei, there's extremely high Muslim populations, which had also, some of them did believe in the Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda's beliefs. So a lot of them were hostile. Different cultures, though. These civilizations have been built above the Pacific Ocean for several thousands of years.
Yeah. And now when you go into a place like Malaysia or Brunei, I mean, do you get particular sort of instructions in terms of what you can do or not do if you go ashore, or do they just not let you go ashore? Or?
Well, they let you go ashore pretty much 90% of all the time. And it depends on the threat condition of the country. Some countries we were required to be in by midnight or 2 o'clock. Some countries we were allowed to stay all night and do whatever we wanted. But Brunei and Malaysia, not really. We had to be in at certain times because of the known terrorist Muslim groups that follow the Al-Qaeda's beliefs. And just general, Brunei is actually a dry country. You can't drink there or anything else. It was actually different. It was a different experience to see water taxis and small islands, but the houses were built above the Pacific Ocean. Just you see different exotic wildlife and sea life, and the MWR, which I had mentioned before on my previous ship, also had several different setups there that you could go through the jungle and several other things. Jungles of Brunei are actually beautiful. The only part that scared me is walking up the mountain and seeing signs that were saying "Watch out for king cobras." But Thailand is actually unforgettable. Watch snake charmers and several things. Ride the elephants, which was amazing also. I always viewed elephants as beautiful creatures, but being up close to them, they can be rather intimidating. The Asian elephant's extremely big. And the snake charmers I thought were just kind of crazy, and people wrestling the alligators and crocs. I never really understood wanting to try to make a connection with the soulless reptile, but it was a way that these people have had to make money for thousands of years.
All right. And then how long then do you actually stay out on the Chancellor, or how long are you out with the Chancellorsville? Was that the rest of your time in the Navy?
No, it was till about 2005.
Okay.
The end of 2005. I received my Junior Sailor of the Year award for the 2004, and I got to receive a plaque, and I also got to see my name up on the mess decks
Mm-hmm.
of the Navy vessel, which is going to be there as long as it's commissioned in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But I was shortly diagnosed afterwards with cancer, so the Navy wasn't really sure what to do with me. So I was assigned to Naval Recruiting District, Michigan, as a recruiter assistant.
All right. You spent basically the sort of the last, 2 years or year and a half or whatever doing that?
Yes, I was going through my cancer issues and just dealing with that and working with actually one of the gentlemen that joined the military with me
Mm-hmm.
for my graduating class. He was actually in the office there.
All right. I ask you a question you don't need to answer. How's your health now?
I'm actually recovering very well.
Okay, good. All right. Describe a little bit the business of being a recruiter. Do you go through a class for how to be a recruiter?
Yeah, it's a sales class. You, to sugarcoat it, you sell war to kids.
Mm-hmm. All right. So how do you do that?
It's very tricky. You don't look them in the eyes. No. Really, it's a different case-by-case situation. You know, sometimes you'll approach someone that's just, you get what's called leads, people that go to Navy.com and request more information,
Mm-hmm.
which it's your duty to take this to them. You know, and some people just come from broken homes with no parents, living with their grandparents, looking to get out. Then there's also the young kids from Muskegon that aren't mature for college yet, just looking to do something else and get out of Muskegon. Then there's, you know, people that are honoring their family who have served in some kind of military branch. And then there's also the anti-war group, the parents that grew up in the 70s protesting the wars and don't believe in it. However, I believe strongly in the military defense because I feel without it, we would be stripped of all our natural resources and be stuck in a third world poverty country.
All right. But would you have people who grew up in that kind of home and then they rebel against their parents and decide to go join the Navy?
Yeah, we got to wait until they're 18 though,
Yeah.
to get them signed up.
Right.
And
Yeah. So there's still a rule in place, but they can't. You could enlist can you enlist in 17 now if your parents sign for you?
yes,
It's still possible.
yes,
Okay.
you can get in the delayed entry program and await boot camp, and you can actually graduate high school at 17 and then join the military. But the requirement is you have to be 17 years old to be in the military.
All right. And the expectation at this point that you need to have a high school diploma or GED to get in, or
It was high school diploma and GED during certain times. However, since the war is dying down pretty much, the demands are high school diploma only. They are not accepting GEDs at all anymore.
all right. Now, as a recruiter, I mean, did you get a fair number of people who were just coming to you and actually wanting to sign up, or were you having to go
Yes,
out?
yes. We had actually a very large debt pool sometimes. I witnessed a man actually lose 90 pounds in 3 months to become a Navy SEAL. And then when he did it, he found out that he wouldn't have as much time to study for college. Then he just picked a different job in the Navy.
Mm-hmm. All right. About how many people do you think you wound up signing up over the course of that time?
I lied to about 20. Signed up about 20.
So in something over a year?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but
About
actually,
a year and a half.
it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like a lot, although I've interviewed a fair number of people who wound up being recruiters at some point, and
Yeah.
that's not unusual necessarily.
The requirements were different. You've got different classes. You've got your high upper males. You've got certain requirements due to equal opportunity of certain. You're required to put in, X amount of Caucasian males and Caucasian females and African males and African females and minorities, it was different, and it was extremely hard to meet every month.
Yeah, because especially if you don't have that large number to begin with,
Yeah.
you're kind of dependent on what group of the population is interested in the first place.
Yeah.
That can get kind of tricky. Because I guess by then, my impression would have been that a lot of the kinds of traditional affirmative action provisions and things would have been struck down by various earlier court decisions, because that's the way it worked for things like college admissions and stuff like that out in the civilian world. You'd had a lot of those things in place, in the 90s or whatever, and then a fair number of those things systematically dismantled afterward. But in the military, though, it was still all pretty much in place.
Yeah. There was lots of different programs, like I said before. You would go through your standard physical evaluation, a little bit of mental evaluation, your ASVAB score, and then you would get to choose your raise. So it was pretty much on point for everything.
All right. And do you, as a recruiter, do you travel around a lot within the area?
Yeah. Yeah, you're constantly in government vehicles, driving around, trying to sell war.
So how far afield did you wind up going?
I went up to Ludington. There was a part-time office up there. That was actually pretty fun. There was different recruiters actually in the Grand Haven area, and then we didn't actually come out here because there was a group that was out in Wyoming that covered this area, and there was actually an office in Holland that was actually covering the Grand Haven office.
All right. And I don't know, did you like the duty, or you decided it was time to get out, or?
They retired me. They evaluated me and decided that because of my condition that I was no longer qualified to serve in the U.S. military.
All right. Now, if you got to pick, I mean, if you had the cancer issue hadn't come up, would you think you'd still be in the Navy right now?
I would.
Okay. Now, look back over the career. Are there other particular experiences that you had, or things that kind of stand out in your memory from the time in the Navy that we kind of haven't brought into the story here yet?
I think I've covered most of it. Several hours of staying awake all hours of the night, and protecting and believing in what we stand for, and the ideology of war. Never really what you can gain, but to understand that you may have to pay the ultimate sacrifice and die for what you honestly believe in. And it takes a very special person to come to that point. But other than that, there was lots of times helicopter landings, VBSS, which is manning other vessels in case they were smuggling drugs or anything within the U.S. or under suspicion.
So did you get involved in doing any of that? I mean, would you?
Yeah, I was part of that. It was extremely fun. It was different. It was starting to understand what the military was all about and protecting the U.S.
And were you doing this when you were with the Ashland or with the
Chancellorsville?
Chancellorsville. Okay.
Chancellorsville.
So where would you be when you were doing that?
We went out on a small boat, like the big boat would say that we're under suspicion that this ship is bringing immigrants from Cuba or whatever the situation may be. But go ahead and we're going to board them and see what they're all about. Then we would board them with all of our artillery and all of our firepower and see what they were all about.
All right. And did you ever find anything interesting?
I don't really want to talk about that one.
Okay, that's fine. Now, were you doing this in U.S. coastal waters, or did you do it other places too?
We did it in other places too, but we did it a lot in the U.S. policies. We were actually in tandem with the Japanese military, so if they weren't in the area and they were under suspicion of something else, we would actually take care of the situation for them.
Now, I guess in Japan, one of the worries, I suppose, is North Korea. I mean,
that's the extreme worry of the Japanese. The Japanese actually, I'd mentioned before that the USS Kitty Hawk was the aircraft carrier that was out there, and aircraft carriers are extremely huge. But the Japanese are extremely intelligent people, much more intelligent than that of the United States.
Better educated, anyway.
Extremely more educated. As far as warfare and other situations, they just definitely don't. But the point being is they were our allies, and they didn't permit any nuclear-powered aircraft carriers or any nuclear-powered anything on their ship. They didn't really like it.
Yeah.
Until conflicts arose with North Korea. Then they started allowing nuclear power in there.
All right. And were there kind of North Korea scares while you were based in Japan?
I watched a lot of Japanese news, and yeah, there was a lot of it's communism.
Yeah, and their missile tests and their nuclear program. And
yeah, they definitely are definitely more powerful than what people would imagine. but power by numbers. And also, the Communist Party they still have a lot of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a strange place. What impression did you have of the South Koreans?
Very generous people, very hospitable, amazing food and culture that had been developed, once again, much, much older than the United States, the New World. The old world of Asia, just everything originated from China, in that Pacific region. And there were many, as you go out towards the Pacific, you see that lots of cultures rely on the ocean for food, and so there was lots of wonderful Korean fishermen as well as Japanese fishermen. Then there's also kimchi, and
So you liked kimchi?
I loved it.
How about that?
It was
Someone
wonderful.
does.
It's extremely spicy.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So it's a lot of okay. So now you're out. Go back to civilian life. Now what do you do?
Well, I found out I had cancer, and I went from working 16 to 18-hour days to not being able to drive my car. And I followed boredom. I was awake for weeks on end, recalling what I did, missing it, loving it, wishing that I could go back. And I didn't feel like I fit into society with everybody else. Tried going to community college and just felt that people didn't really understand the big picture. Lots of closed-mindedness and not really understanding. So it was different. So I feel that to blend in more of society and to be more effective in American society, we are the cradle of education. So a college education is pretty much required now. The fact of being a veteran is good, but it's not always what employers are looking for. So to adapt to civilian life, I decided to go back to school.
All right. And so what are you studying now?
I was very uncertain what I wanted to do, as I went to community college. So I went to machining. Because it was engineering, and it was clean engineering. I didn't have to spend hours in oil, and so I went to that, and mathematics were extremely hard, but I suckered through it all and made it through hours of countless studying. And I laid back one day and I looked around. Everybody was laid off from a shop, and I just thought to myself, well, this isn't really what I want to do. I don't want to plan on getting a degree and then getting laid off. So eventually I tried different other fields, and then I went to general studies. But with my extreme naval history and my foreign relations, I'm completed with Mesquite Community College, and I'm currently going to Grand Valley for an international relations degree with a minor in history.
All right. And what would you like to do with that when you finished?
I'd love to work for the Department of Defense again as a DoD civilian contractor.
That would seem to be a pretty logical choice.
Yeah, it took me a long way to find that route, though.
All right. Well, I'd just like to close this out by thanking you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, I thank you.